All right. So the topic tonight is living within God's rhythms of time, and it's this topic is supposed to be a focus on one of our core values at Christ the King Anglican, which the the value that we're talking about might seem a little oblique from the actual topic for tonight, but the value that we're talking about is centered on communion, which I might be leading the discussion a little bit too much there. That that but I think that living within God's rhythms has a lot of application for how we center our lives on what God gives us, namely and mainly in the Eucharist, which is communion.
When he started like 7.
And so that's the reason why in the title I mentioned centered on communion, which is one of our core values, and then the title for tonight, which is living within God's rhythms of time. The format tonight's going to be pretty simple. Some we just launch straight into discussion. Others, it's helpful, I think, to give a little bit of a preface, an intro talk to give you guys some vocabulary and some dots on the map that you guys in discussion can connect later. And that's what I'm going to do tonight. I'm going to give about a 10-minute intro, maybe a little less, about the rhythms of creation that God built in, and then the rhythms that God built into the Old Covenant, and then those in the New Covenant. So I'll start right now. So we notice right off the bat in reading the scripture that God is slicing and dicing his creation into sections. He's separating the waters. He's dividing the day and the night. He's setting it in order. And one of the things that you notice about how he separates time is that he sets things up in cycles. Now, we take this for granted because it's the only world we've ever known. But he could have created a world without cycles, without rhythms, eternal day, or eternal night, or all the same season, or whatever it might be. But he chose to position the planets, position the sun in such a way where, and to create a universe where things rotated and orbited, where things happened in cycles and rhythms. And some of the rhythms that he himself points out are the rhythms of days, weeks, months, seasons, and years. Now, you might think that these are labels that have come from science, kind of our attribution that we give to certain things that we notice that happen every day, even the word, oh, the sun went down, it rose back up, we'll call that a day. But it was God that called it a day. And it was God that made the week. And he did that. He named it because he created it. And it has a purpose. And so one of the first things he does is to name it a day. And then after, he reflects on his week, and he makes the cycle of a week, ending it with the Sabbath. I won't go into it because you guys already know the cycles of creation. I'll spend more time on the Old Covenant. On top of this created rhythm this rhythm of creation, God overlays the sacred rhythms which he gives to Israel. They are supposed to worship in a yearly cycle, a daily cycle, a weekly cycle. They have seasons. They use the months. They use the lunar calendar instead of the solar calendar for months. And then they even had cycles of years, like the Sabbath year every 7, and then every 50 years they had a double Sabbath. A Sabbath year on year 49, and then a year of Jubilee on year 50. but the point, before I go into those in particular, that I'd like to make is that God made a created rhythm, and then he was intending that rhythm to be the foundation of a sacred rhythm of worship, of that his church in the Old Testament, which would be Israel, his church Israel, would worship within. And the two are very connected. The sacred and worship rhythms are informed and tied to his created rhythms. And so just to go into those more specifically, you have the daily rhythm. The main daily rhythm of the people of Israel was they offered a sacrifice in the temple every morning and every evening. Every morning and every evening they would do a sacrifice at the temple. Every week they would have a Sabbath. And on the Sabbath there would be temple worship. There would also be Sabbath kept in the synagogues, because not everyone went to the temple every week. In fact, nobody did, except for the high priest, and I think a very few number of Levites that helped him at the temple. Within the months, which were created by the weeks, you have the seasonal feasts. You have things like Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. You have the Feast of Tabernacles and the Feast of Trumpets. You have Passover. These things happen on a season. You have the Feast of Unleavened Bread. I'm drawing a blank on the Harvest Feast. Does anyone know the Harvest Feast? You're muted. But can anyone pitch in the Harvest Feast? What was that one?
That was a Booth's, was it?
Yeah, the Feast of Booths might be it.
No.
That was like a pre-Passover. Yeah, I need to study back up. In seminary, I would have known those things, but alas,
I think it's called the Feast of Tabernacles. Is that right?
Yeah. The Feast of Tabernacles and Feast of Booths, I think, is the same thing. It might be. Since two of you guys said it, let's just say that that's the one.
Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't hear the other person say.
No. It's the different name. I'm glad you brought it up. And then in terms of a yearly rhythm, every single Israelite was required by the law, by the Mosaic law, to attend at the temple once every year, at least once, and I think even 3 times at certain portions was observed in the history of Israel. And like I said, every 7 years there was a Sabbath year where they wouldn't farm. They would let the ground lie fallow, and they would trust the Lord. They didn't ever do this very well, but they were supposed to, that they would trust the Lord to provide double on the 6th year to provide for all of the 7th year. They would take a year off. And then on the year of Jubilee, they would not only take that 49th year off, but then on the year of Jubilee, they would forgive all the debts. All the land would go back to its original owner in the family. It was a big year. Unfortunately, it never happened. Because as you guys can imagine, keeping a rhythm that God prescribes does not jive with worldly logic. And that's going to be a big theme tonight. And yet, it was the key to living within God's blessing in the Old Covenant. And that's not just, those things aren't, his blessing and the keeping of it, they're not detached. It was a way of living into his blessing, that if they would have been faithful, he would have blessed them. If they would have taken off the Sabbath, he would have blessed them. I have 2 Chick-fil-A employees on this call tonight. I do not think that it is any coincidence that it's one of the most successful companies in the world, and it's the only one that I know of that's a big corporation like that sets off a day of the week in honor of the Lord, to rest in their business. There's a lot of other reasons for their success, I'm sure. 2 of them are on the call, but that's one of them. But Israel just never really had a lot of faith in the Sabbath, in the rhythms that God himself prescribed. When Christ came, he did not do away with the rhythms of the old covenant. This is one of the worst fruits of the Radical Reformation. And before I progress, I want to explain what I mean by that. There was the Reformation, and when you read the guys who were reforming the church at the very beginning, guys like Calvin and Luther, even Zwingli, although he's more a part of the radical, he kind of brings in the Radical Reformation in some sense, him and Calvin's followers. But these first generation of reformers were extremely sane when it came to what are we changing? What are we keeping? What are we having to throw out? Because God forbid we throw out the baby with the bathwater. And so you don't really have a lot of change in terms of like things like church calendar or morning and evening prayer or a weekly Eucharist. Those things they just took for granted. They didn't seek to change them. But in the second generation and the third generation of the Reformation, you have this radical disjunct between the Catholic inheritance of the church and the new way that they were going to live within the Protestant world. And one of the things that was really lost during this time was the church's connection to the worship of Israel as its foundation, which had, as we pointed out, its foundation in the created rhythms that we find in Genesis. And so what happens is the church becomes this arithmetic kind of nothing. There's very little upon which it can build a culture of life. And so it devolves into what we've called in the past in these sessions as kind of a propositional thing, where Christian life is primarily about the acquiring of a propositional truth, namely that you're justified by faith alone. And you're reminded of that every week, and it never changes throughout the whole year. It just kind of, boom, gospel message, boom, gospel message from week to week. And what's cut out is the rhythm that God himself made, that he gave to Israel, that he gave to earth, and that he gives to his church. But that went away in the Radical Reformation. Now, I'll go into particular this last thing. The thing that we lost was the fulfillment of the old covenant. Because when Christ came, he fulfilled the law, and he gives the law in its fulfilled state to the church. And so they had Passover. We have Easter. In fact, in the Eastern church, they call it Pascha, not Easter. Easter is only a Western term, and they resent us for using it. Pascha is the most traditional name for Easter, and that's because it relates directly to Passover. Good Friday is the fulfillment of Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, the day of the year where we come together and where the Jews would atone for their sins and where we celebrate and reflect and reapply to ourselves that great mystery of salvation where our atonement happened. I won't go into all of it, but even Pentecost, like the Feast of Pentecost was 50 days after Pascha, after the Passover, which was the waving of the bread, the wheat. It was the offering up to God of the wheat harvest. Well, these things are significant in the life of the church. But at the very least, whether or not we go back to our Jewish roots, which I think is very important, understanding the worship of God as a rhythm that has some variety, like the changing of the seasons, we call these in the church seasons, has value. And those are some of the things we're going to discuss tonight. So that's the end of the introduction. I've already gone over what the rhythms of creation are, which was the first topic. But I wanted to just start off the conversations, and I'll unmute you all now, by asking the question, how should we relate to the rhythms that God built into creation? Keep in mind, we're talking about creation right now. What's our role? How are we supposed to live into those? Let's start with day.
Well, I think it's John Beck. I think it's not a surprise that we have the night and day in our circadian rhythm, because it's about our health, and it's about it gives us an opportunity to do during the day. You can do God's work, maybe doing physical labor and things of that nature. But the night, it's time of rest, relaxation. The darkness, it helps facilitate a chance for us to revitalize ourselves, so that when we wake up again in the morning, we can be refreshed and able to continue God's will for us.
Amen. Amen. I've talked to people who pride themselves on being night owls, and I have nothing against night owls. I really don't. In seminary, I was both a night owl and an early bird. And I'm sure you all have had seasons in your life where you've been both. But what does God prefer? No, that's a bad way of saying it. What does God prescribe? Because we have a natural theology. Before we go any further, I want to introduce the concept of natural theology. Natural theology is the idea that the way that God made the earth can boss us around and should boss us around. It means something for us. It is prescriptive. So the fact that God made the earth a certain way, namely with day and night, is if you have a natural theology, which Protestantism has largely lost, it prescribes how you ought to live and what you ought to believe. And so because we have a natural theology, what is God's prescribed way for us to live and move and sleep and have our being? In terms of sleep and waking.
Well, I would say it would be to start winding down as the sun is going down, and to get in that pattern of tracking the rise and setting of the sun.
What are you drinking?
Yeah.
So,
And do we have anyone who goes to sleep, earlier in the evening and wakes up, at the butt crack of dawn? Dawn?
Not right now, but
I don't go to bed early, but I get up. Or I don't go to bed early, but I get up early.
yeah, I hear you.
You're in one of those cycles. Yeah, I've been there. Yeah, you have 7 kids, Karen, so
Yes.
that'll
My alone time is at night and in the morning, so I try to take advantage of both.
Yep. I get it. But good. Any other things about living into the rhythm of the day?
I always think of redeem the time, just whenever you talk about, whenever anybody talks about time. I think that was kind of beaten into my head when I was a kid by my grandma. Make the most of it.
Yeah. Anything else before we move on? Any other way that you think God is telling us to live in creating the day?
I was just thinking about, this is Scott Godwin, may say Christopher. I've got my video turned off because I'm on my cell phone, but I hope you can hear me.
Mm-hmm.
There's a book I read that I really like called The Sacred and Profane, and it's really about how secular our lives are, even if we're believers. It's about modern life, about how secular it is. And I think this topic that you're teaching on tonight is so important, more important than anyone realizes, because like you're saying, our natural rhythms and our connection to the natural world is so disconnected from God and from spiritual matters that people get into all sorts of Gnostic practices. I think you said something on Facebook about this, but because I work in the fitness, wellness, nutrition world, I see that all the time with people making idols out of yoga and all these physical things. But I think it is because our society is so secular and so separated from natural theology, natural religion. So hopefully that makes sense.
It does. And we need to remember that, Scott, because we're going to go back to that. The question that we're going to be asking is, how does the lack of rhythm lead to secularism? And then conversely, how does living in God's rhythm lead to the world becoming sacred to us again? That is the play out. Exactly right. And yeah, let's get there quickly. How does God intend for us to use the week?
To work for his glory. To do our work for his glory, to make him look great.
To work, yep, that's good. To work, right, for his glory. I love that. I love the way.
And I think, I mean, he just like the creation, and then you throw in the fourth commandment. We follow the daily cycle and living healthy, but it's really making sure that seventh day we pay it back to God, and we take a special effort to really remind ourselves, kind of distance ourselves maybe from the secular world as best we can, and really focus on reconnecting with Him or connecting with Him that day.
Yeah. Yeah, and we're gonna go back through these and talk about them in terms of the worship that he does prescribe specifically. But at the very least, just in terms of just viewing creation as itself and what it means for us, as Karen said, he divides things into work and rest. He doesn't say mix it in. A little bit here, a little bit there. It's, you work for 6 days, and of course there's rest in the evening, but then there's a day of rest. And so he really divides work and rest, that he could have done it a different way, right? He could have given a daily Sabbath, couldn't he?
True. Quick question, Tony.
Yeah.
Kind of like taking us back to what is God's intention for the week, but what is God's intention for the day? And then this is where my question is going. We have night and day, right? And we have agreed that the night is for the rest. And I think Scott alluded that we live in this secular world. And in this secular world, night really doesn't mean anything, because Walmart is open 24 hours a day.
Right.
We do all our business in all kinds of hours, and if they're not doing that, we get frustrated, right?
Right.
Because we want to get it at that time. So could you comment on that, how we as a Christian society, we've been pulled into that, and it's okay?
Yeah. You know what I'm going to do? I will comment on that, Innocent. And I think we're going to accelerate, because I can see where you guys are interested in talking about, which is always a difficult thing to guess. But I had that on the last question. I'll bump it up for you, Innocent. What in modern American culture assists or prohibits living in God's rhythm? But both of the comments we've had so far, they both deal with just how secularism really contrasts with rhythm, God's rhythm. That you find them butting against each other profoundly. And maybe you've never thought about it. Maybe you've never thought about just how much of a battle is happening about God's rhythm and the secular culture. So we'll get there. But I first want to, I marked down the question, Innocent. I want to get through just the concept of how we're supposed to use seasons. Let's move to seasons. Why do you think God made seasons? What difference is it supposed to make for you?
To give us variety.
Yeah, good.
And wonder and enjoyment.
Yes.
Then to
Pleasure.
yeah, to notice them.
Hmm.
Yeah, I was
I
thinking.
think
Oop, you go, Innocent.
I was thinking that God made seasons for our growth, because even in the Bible, it says there's a season to sow and then there's a season to reap. And I think also in our spiritual life, right, we have those seasons where you go through something and God is teaching you something, and you have a season where you come out on the other end and you are reaping, your diligence and your obedience to God. So I think He made it for our growth to understand as we grow in spirit, to look back and see where you came from and see what you've conquered, see what you've come through.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's good.
And it's His promise to us too that the seasons. I'm sorry, John. That the seasons would never end.
Yeah.
After the wasn't that after
Flood.
the ark? And He said He
Yeah.
promised that the seasons would never end.
Yeah.
And see, I was thinking when I read question 2, I thought, when I look at day and night and I look at the seasons, I think of the cycle of life, right? And every day you get a reminder that there's a sun and there's a night. And the seasons, you got your spring where you got birth and renewal. You've got the fall, and I just saw it like it's God's reminder, that our time on the earth is limited, and we, don't lose focus off of Him, because there's a cycle. And our time on the earth is going to kind of follow that kind of life cycle, and we just need to be prepared.
Yeah, very, very good, John. I mean, the ancients said, what was the phrase? The Latin phrase, was it memento mori? Remember thy death. It is one of the biggest keys to growing spiritually. It's just to think and to have kind of as a bolted on thought that I am going to die and God is going to raise me up. That's huge. And the seasons, as you mentioned, they train us to think about this. One of the things that seasons do for me is they teach me to wait. I like to garden. I'm terrible at it, but I love the idea of planting something and watching it grow. You can only do that once a year. Twice a year if you're a fall gardener. Can't do it in the winter.
But that's a big thing, because we're an instant gratification society now. We don't like waiting.
Right.
So
what do seasons do for us practically? What do they affect for you? What do they teach you, and what do they affect you at, like, what's their effect on you?
I think they affect your mood too, Tony.
Yeah.
If you look at the winter is so gloomy and everybody's just dragging. Then you start to see the spring come around, people starting to come alive. So I think it really has an impact on our moods.
Yeah. Does that mean that just because the winter is gloomy, could there be a value to gloomy? Because the gloominess is physiological.
Yes.
But
we get bored easily too. It's like when it gets too hot, we can't wait for fall and winter.
Right.
It's like we're not easily pleased.
I don't know about you guys, but some of my most, as I remember, as I look back and read my journals, the times of greatest growth were during the winter.
Mm-hmm.
They were not during the summer.
Mm-hmm.
When it was summer, I was playing.
Golfing.
I was golfing.
That does not promote growth.
But in the winter, gloomy might mean maybe another way of saying it is pensive. You're
more introspective. Yeah.
Perspective. Yeah. There's value to that.
Mm-hmm.
Good. These are really good, guys. What is the year? What do you think that the value of a year, an annual cycle, is for you? And why do you think God made it? I will never guess what that was.
Sounded like a door.
That was awesome door.
Yes, sorry about that. I would say one thing I was thinking about a minute ago, I picked up a new hobby of turkey hunting this year, which was a lot of fun. I didn't get one, but I'd say that would have just been icing on the cake because I sat outside for 8 hours with the phone turned off, and it was just an amazing sight to see the trees coming alive and hearing 20 different types of birds. So I think when you start to slow down and notice those things, you do see that cycle of nature and springtime and everything coming back. And it sort of connects to Easter and hope. And there's a certain just natural, this may be difficult to explain, but it's kind of like a puzzle has been put together. When you're out in nature, it's just like everything's perfect. I mean, there's things are dying and there's trees that are dead and animals are, singing to each other and attacking each other in some cases. But does that make sense? It's just like it's like a symphony is playing of nature, and everything is perfect, and you're just sitting there watching it and listening to it.
Yeah.
So, Scott, I grew up in that, and to me, it was just normal. And I was looking at your world and saying it's perfect.
Scott, Innocent grew up in what country, Innocent?
I grew up in Zimbabwe.
Zimbabwe. So one of the things that I see in the value of a year is that it gives us the idea that that things that good things often become good after they build on themselves. For instance, if you were only going to have Christmas once, then you would never have traditions. You'd never have nostalgia. You'd never have the things that you just do every year. I don't particularly like Handel's Messiah. I don't particularly like Handel's music at all. I find him kind of oral, I guess. But I really love singing the Messiah because I did it every year for 10 years. And so I know it. And the fact that I've done it, it's had a chance to kind of, I don't know whether the images settle or form a patina, or I don't know what the metaphor should be. But we wouldn't have that if everything was just, if it only had one shot to do anything. The very fact that life kind of repeats and we get another chance to do the same things over and over and over again until we die.
Or to do them better.
Yeah, to do them better. So it also gives us an idea of improvement. That's probably how most of the world relates to a yearly cycle. They make resolutions. I love New Year's resolutions, by the way. I know that I'm not with everyone on that. But I think that I'm leaning into what God intended in the year. Because why else would he make a year?
You want your gardening to be better this year.
Yeah. He wants you to get better. Yeah. Yeah. These are good. Okay. So let's move on from that. We really answered the first two questions. So we're to the third. What are the rhythms of the world? Let's jump into this issue. What are the rhythms of the world? When I say the world, I mean the world in terms of the Johannine use of the term, the cosmos, that which sets itself against God. Not the earth.
The only thing I can think of is that it's just chaos. Like there is no rhythm.
That's such a good word, Karen. I didn't even think of chaos. Yes, it's chaos. That's so good. What else? Can anyone find any rhythms that we have? There's a few.
It also, to add on to that chaos, I also think there's rhythm in that chaos. What we see is chaos, and when you follow it through, I think there's a rhythm to that.
Yeah.
Because the way I look at this, the nature is here to stay, and me and you are just figments of this nature. We can try to change whatever we want to change, but me and you are going to leave, and nature is going to continue. So I feel like because of the little time we're spending on this, it might seem as chaos, but there's a certain rhythm. These things are happening, but because I have this little much time in this world, it's chaotic to me.
Well, that's a good point. You know, I think, and Rich, you might have some perspective on this, being a history teacher, you know, and a history buff. History is rhythmic.
Oh, sure.
You know, and chaos is chaos is a part of that rhythm, just like the rise and falls of empires is the rhythm.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we're on the stinky backside of this empire, but we'll see. What are some rhythms that the world does? Let's not think of it just purely in terms of the world. Let's just think of modern culture. What types of rhythms do we abide by? And it's not all bad. What rhythms are present right now? Richie?
The work week.
One thing,
What's that?
I'm going inside because it's getting a little cold. That's the rhythm I'm working on right now.
Who's 770? Is that Sharon?
Yeah, it's Sharon. She said this is David, Father Tony. She said the work week.
Yes, the work week. Okay. And what is the work week?
Monday through Friday, 8 to 5.
Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. Is that your work? Raise your hand if that's your work week.
Was.
Okay. What's your work week?
24/7.
That's right.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and Sharon, you tell me if I'm wrong. Do you think that was probably more descriptive of culture, maybe in the past, maybe like 20, 30 years ago? Or do you think that's still kind of descriptive of our current culture?
Was that Monday through Saturday 50 years ago?
Yeah, the majority of people are on that schedule. There's, others, I'm sure.
That's true. That's true. Hourly workers would certainly be on that schedule.
I know when you look at it started, and I'm saying this is one of the things that's starting to get better with America is there is a belief, and you look at the cultures of work around the world, we pride ourselves on overwork, right? It's a badge of honor. I worked 73 hours this week, or, hey, I punched in 104 hours this week. And, that's a pride thing. So I think in terms of the rhythm of the world, somebody said it before, the 24/7 and the instant, I think that's where we're leaning more towards, is because you can get news anytime you want. TV never turns off.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, my impression of there's probably two tiers to work culture in America. One being kind of an hourly employee, and one being more of either a managerial or a corporate career, or a teacher, medical, like those types of careers. No doubt those who are working in the service industry as employees, hourly employees, are going to be working more of an 8 to 5, 9 to 5. But I think the career work culture has tended to bleed into the weekends more. Maybe not in every case. I can tell you that it bleeds into mine. I have a 7-day work week. I really try to take a day off, and Vandy really holds my feet to the fire. So does my coach. I have a plant coach. She nags me about taking a day off.
I think the advent of email and smartphones has kind of elongated the work week for the quote unquote corporate or professional type jobs. I was responding to work emails last night at 10:30 at night. I mean, I had gaps during the day where I wasn't doing much of anything, but I'm probably doing 8 hours of work, but it's sort of spread out in a less structured way. So the ability of employers to reach their employees at any time of day, and then sometimes expecting a response, any time of day. And with people, having 90% of people having a device that lets them get in touch with somebody right away, that's sort of elongated the work week, I feel like.
I think two things pop out in my mind. I work with a lot of hourly work, and so there's this expression, time is money, which I think is probably correct in purely economic terms, but the scary thing about that is you start thinking in this sort of utilitarian fashion, and you start to objectify other people, start to, I'm talking in general terms. Hopefully I don't do that. I'm not saying I've never done it, but you start to look at people in terms of utility, or, you start to objectify, okay, what is this person who's wasting my time? Are they paying me money? This sort of, that type of thinking, I think, in our society has crept in as Christianity has declined, I guess, somewhat. So it's unfortunate, but I think time, always thinking about efficiency, maximum utility. These are sort of dangerous roads to go down if they're not balanced by Christian ideals of humanism and so on.
So that was key, Scott. Thank you. I mean, what you just brought up pointed out that whether or not it's a 9-to-5 work week, or whether it's kind of a bleed through, which I think there's probably two cultures. Some, and maybe a little bit of it is less socioeconomic, maybe some of it's generational, whatever. The main way that Americans divide up their time is with work, right? What are the main divisions of human life in terms of an American mindset? You have the times that you're working, and then the times that you're not working in the day, right? You have those who do, and it's a good discipline, of course, to take a day off. They would define that as my day off. My day off what? My day off work. In terms of a year, you have times that you're working, and then you have what? Vacation, which is a stop from work. And the instrument that you use to divide your time will ascribe to it its value. And as Scott pointed out, when you divide time with work, the value is money. And the culture is efficiency. And what was the other one that you used? Utility. But there's another way to divide time. It involves work. God divides time with work. But what if our primary way of thinking about time was dividing it with worship, as God instructed Israel and as was received by the church? That, I'm in, what season am I in? I'm in Easter season. We're in Easter 3 right now. What if that was your primary way of thinking about life? It was interesting that in about 100 years ago, a lot of people signed their letters by the liturgical season. Did you know that? So they'd put a date like the Tuesday after the third Sunday in Easter, or the Wednesday. That would be today. And so they if you do that, you're cutting up your time with worship. What's the value then of time? If you divide time with worship, what's the value? It's not money. It's communion. It's fellowship
So
with the Lord. Go ahead, Innocent.
I I get where you're coming from, Tony, but from a practical perspective,
Sure.
the reason why we're dividing time with work is because work is the provider, right? The roof that I'm in, work provides for that, you know. So I think we are doing that because it is the number one thing that will provide for my family and myself, and also provide for me to thank God at the end of the week by tithing, right?
Do you guys agree with what Innocent said? Is work the number one thing that will provide for your needs?
I would disagree.
Yeah.
Okay, David.
I mean, I would like to debate that because I want us to be very, very practical.
Yes.
That if you do not go to work, right, what will happen?
Yeah.
I Father Tony, this is David. I understand exactly what Innocent is saying, and to an extent,
Yeah.
I agree with him. But we also, it is more of a style of living that we want to keep more than just sustenance. That's the reason too. We believe that both spouses have to work. There's a lot of things we do because we allow society to tell us. I think we can look at the book of Mark, at the Gospel of Mark mainly. There is constantly work, rest, Sabbath, work, rest, Sabbath. That is what just is continually repeated in the book of Mark. And that is what we are designed for. Work, rest, Sabbath. And if we get out of that, then we end up to where I would argue society is today. The house I live in, the comfort that I have, the schools my children go to, the car I drive becomes more important than my spiritual health, my mental health, everything about me.
Mm-hmm.
I would argue that chaos was the word I used with society too, but there's also a velocity to it. It is fast in the secular world today. Everything is fast, immediate. How many of us send out a text, and if somebody doesn't respond to a text in 5 minutes or less, we wonder what is wrong? How come they haven't answered me yet?
Yeah.
Chris? Oh, he's saying you. Yeah. And David, you brought up Sabbath. The Sabbath being the thing that kind of contradicts the secular model, which is why God insisted on it so much. But Innocent, in terms of Sabbath, what is our work? Obviously, it is a primary contributor to our well-being and our sustenance. But when God commands the Israelites to not work on one day of the week and 1 year every 7, what is he teaching them?
I think it's discipline.
Rest.
But and I maybe talking about the Sabbath right now.
Yeah.
Maybe let's dive into what the Sabbath really is, right? Because I think it's a term that gets thrown loosely.
Sure.
But when I'm saying I'm observing the Sabbath, right, it doesn't mean that I'm just at home. There are a lot of things that I'm not supposed to be doing when I'm observing the Sabbath.
Yeah, and it's probably better. Let's think about, just to take it to the extreme, let's think about that double Sabbath year on the year of Jubilee. Let's think about that. Like, what is that supposed to teach man about where his sustenance comes from?
Trust God.
Go ahead, Innocent.
Trust God.
Yeah, and it's not by our own work.
Yes.
That we live. We work. We work because God commands us to, Yet God can withhold blessing from us like that. It is only by God that we have anything that we need. And I think that where as David said, innocent, where you went is understandable. But I think that I would just change it to say that it's not the primary thing. God's provision is the primary thing that gives us life. So what's the value? We already asked that question. Where are we? Lost my spot. That's what good conversation does. Good job, guys. Anyone have any thoughts while I regather my head?
I have a question.
Yep.
What does a Sabbath day look like? Because my girls and I are reading the Little House on the Prairie series. If you've ever read that, like, they did nothing. Like, the kids were not allowed to touch anything. They weren't allowed to play, which obviously is very extreme.
Right.
But I've never been able to really define it for myself. I mean, my school planning for my week, I do it on Sunday afternoons. Because I'm doing other things on Sunday. Am I resting? Am I not resting? What does a Sabbath day rest look like, practically speaking?
So I think I can speak to that because half of my family, they do that, and a true Sabbath it's actually defined in terms of sunrise till sundown, right? You do not cook. You do not work, you don't do anything. You go to church, you read the Bible, you pray as a family. That's it. The food that you eat is food that was prepared before sunrise of the Sabbath. So
where does that idea come from?
Excuse me?
Where does that idea come from?
I don't know the origin of it, but that's what the people that observe true Sabbath do.
In where you're
But
from.
are they observing the true Sabbath, or are they doing what the Jewish people did and creating 613 more laws to keep from breaking 10 because every time they broke them, they were carried into captivity?
I think at this point I cannot tell you the origin, but I'm telling you what everybody who observes Sabbath, that's what they do. So it's just the question that you just asked is somebody.
But I observe Sabbath, but I do woodworking. That's the way I relax. That's one way I look at God's nature. I stay away from secular work. I stay away from my business. I plant flowers. I work in the yard. The things relax and reconnect.
Innocent, do you mean when you say that everyone that keeps Sabbath, do you mean where you're from?
So the people that I know that keep the Sabbath is the Seventh-day Adventist folks, right? And half of my family is that.
Okay.
And
so you're talking about your family. You're not saying that everyone ought to keep it that way. You're saying
I didn't say ought. Yeah.
That's how Seventh-day Adventists in your family keep it.
It's almost like Orthodox, Reform. There might be several layers of what Sabbath means to several different people in terms of just their interpretation of it.
Let's stick to what Sabbath meant in the Old Covenant, and then let's translate that into the New. What did it mean in the Old Covenant?
I thought it was closer to what Innocent was saying.
Okay. A cease from work, right? That's the most obvious one. What else does it mean? Because that's a pretty terrible Sabbath, if you think about it.
Well, isn't
if
there
your only requirement is to do nothing, that's awful.
aspect of worship to Sabbath?
Yes, so we worship on Sabbath. Very good. So worship and rest.
Yeah, but Jesus came to fulfill the Sabbath, and his disciples walked long distances on the Sabbath. They picked grain on the Sabbath. Jesus did medical work on the Sabbath. I mean, there were necessities that Jesus said were fine, in complete defiance of everything that the Jewish authorities had put in place. So Jesus changed the Jewish Sabbath completely by allowing for things that, by classic Judaism would have been against their law.
Right. Agreed. And we're not saying we're not listing these so that we can do them. We're listing them so that we can understand what God was doing, because those things are still there. The practice of them might not be valid or required, but the principle of them is certainly. So, but
it's the heart behind the Sabbath that's the most important thing.
That's right. And in order to get that, we start with the form of the Sabbath, and we get to the substance or the essence of it. But one of the things, guys, that is often missing in Sabbatarian circles, but it's never missing from from an Orthodox or even the middle one, something Jewish, is that they party hardy on the Sabbath, and they get dressed up in their finest duds. When we were in Jerusalem with my students last year, it's not sunrise to sundown. It's sunset to sundown. So on Friday at around 7 or 6:30, the streets just went empty. No one was out. And then about 45 minutes later, everyone just came piling out of their doors, all of these Orthodox Jewish men and women, and they're wearing their big, cylindrical hats, and the girls are all in their fancy dresses, and everyone, they're wearing lots of makeup, and they're going to a party, a Shabbat party. And that's how they spent the Sabbath. And so Sabbath is meant to rest from your labor, to worship the Lord, and to enjoy his gifts. And that's often lacking. The intentional enjoyment of what God has provided. Does that make sense?
It makes me think of a Baptist potluck.
Amen. Yeah. Yep. Okay, so what does Sabbath mean for us? Practically, to Innocent's point.
I think there is this tension. It's been fun hearing everyone's comments between the way the world is working around us and the way we want to observe the Sabbath. And it sounds like we have varying degrees of success with that, but we want it to be a day of rest and celebration, and we have to constantly keep working at it.
Yeah, agreed. So let's start with the most basic. Is Sunday the Christian Sabbath?
Yes, I presume.
What, Richie?
That it is now.
It is
Maybe
now.
certainly wasn't always, but in our culture, sure, yeah, it is now.
Yeah. Would everyone agree that God's command to rest one day of the week is still prescriptive for us?
Sure.
If not for his worship, but for our own benefit. I think it's both. Okay, then if that's the case, the churches believe that and taught that that Christ's resurrection instituted a new rest, and that was on a Sunday, and so we worship on Sundays. What is a Sunday? What ought a Sunday to look like for a Christian? Is it merely up to men's consciences?
Joyful.
Should be joyful.
Church needs to be over by 12:30, so because kickoff is at 1 o'clock.
What do y'all think?
I think you almost have to back up a step to what is rest, exactly. Like I find playing basketball restful. I really enjoy it. Golf, some people fishing, hunting. I mean, these are leisure activities. They're not profit motivated activities that people find relaxation and joy in. And I think those are all good things, but that would be shocking to certain, sects of Judaism, even certain, certain denominations that, would object to anything more strenuous than sort of sitting in your chair reading scripture. So I think the defining rest is almost sort of the key there.
Tony, I was wondering what the passage in Romans 14, which is sort of in Paul addressing the concept of liberty, and in verse 5 and following, one person esteems one day above another esteems every day alike. Let each be fully convinced in his own mind. He who observes the day observes it to the Lord, and he who does not observe the day to the Lord, he does not observe it. He who eats to the Lord. He who gives God thanks. He who does not eat, to the Lord he does not eat, and he gives God thanks. None of us lives to himself, none dies to himself. If we live to the Lord, and if we die to the Lord. Whether we live or die, we are the Lord's. Does this fit in here?
Well, I think that it affirms the power of the Christian conscience as to how we ought to live. I mean, I think that the reference here is far more attached to the Judaism, the concept.
Agreed. I mean, we know that they're talking about, but I'm saying in terms of when you asked, what does the Sabbath look like?
Right.
And that question obviously has historically in the church is one of the things that has divided the church. I mean, that's what's behind many of our denominations, actually. What constitutes proper Sabbath activity?
Yeah.
That's why King James the First, that wonderful person, banned golf in Scotland in the early 1600s from being played on the Sabbath.
Well, so I'll give you guys the traditional answer here, because there's a lot of variety out there. I mean, the traditional answer is that you of course you go to worship, and that you see the Sabbath as a tithe of the week, and so it's a day given to the Lord. Now, that doesn't mean that you're always doing study or acts of mercy or necessarily, but everything is done with a deep intention that you're enjoying things from the Lord and giving things back to the Lord. That's because, and it's because on the Christian Sabbath, the central act is the Eucharist, where we take the best of what we have in bread and wine, and we offer them to God, and he gives it back to us with the very best that he has. And so the Sabbath is this trading gifts with God all day. And for you, I'll tell you, if God's gift to you is golf, then golf. But I will say that there's a lot of things that people do that for them is living apart from the Lord. So for one, golf can be something that's very Eucharistic. And for others, it can be a distraction from things that are true and good and beautiful. Let each man live by his own conscience. I golf on the Sabbath. Just so you know. When Rich invites me to Pine Tree.
That's right. Well, I'm not on Sunday.
These are good. These are good. Go ahead.
I have some friends who are Orthodox Jews, and I've learned a fair amount about that religion. And it seems to me, I'd like to hear your comments on this, but it seems to me that in our faith, there is a constant tension between the rules and rituals of religion and how important they are, and the essence of the Good Samaritan and charity and faith in Christ, and but not swinging too far in either direction. Am I correct to think that that is something we have to balance with the Sabbath?
Can you rephrase it, Scott?
How do you know when you're not taking it serious enough, I guess is I feel like that you could say that with a lot of things in Christianity compared to its roots in Judaism. I think there was a quote that C.S. Lewis made where he said something about Cardinal Newman making an idol out of all the rituals of the Roman Catholic Church, that sort of thing. So I guess I'm trying to be better about the Sabbath myself, but it's hard to know, like, when do you have it right, because we're not a rules-based religion when it comes to rituals and that sort of thing.
The standard answer in the history of the church is that matters of conscience should be worked out with and under spiritual direction and or pastoral care. It's never good to go into a matter of discretion or conscience by ourselves, because we are our own worst deceiver and we don't know ourselves. And it's not to say that a pastor is infallible, but it at least gives another view of a matter that's a little bit more objective than subjective. And so whether that's worked out with a soul friend or with community, I'd say the best way to go about this is to simply include others who you respect in your decisions, because they can tell you, they'll call your bull crap if it's there. Next question I want to talk about, and we might end on this one, is what do rhythms and cycles do to us? And specifically, how do they make us more holy? And how does a lack of rhythm make us more secular? And when I say rhythms, I mean God's rhythms. How do God's rhythms make us more holy? And how do a lack of God's rhythms make us more secular? What about rhythm makes us more holy? Like, what does it do to us?
Well, we worship a God of... Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Karen?
No, I was just saying it connects us with our Creator.
Yes, how? How does how does living in rhythm connect us with our Creator? I agree.
I don't have an answer for that.
Well, I think if you just look at it, they always say nothing good happens after 10 o'clock. And, that's one thing. But when you're out of rhythm and you're out of sync, you don't make good decisions, and you definitely probably aren't putting God in your thoughts when you're out of that rhythm, because you're in turmoil, and that's probably where you make some of your bigger regretful decisions that might pull you away from God. If you don't have a healthy rhythm, or you're not in sync with the Lord's earthbound rules, when when you're going against that flow, you're going to make bad decisions.
Excellent. Yeah, that there's a health in God's rhythms that will help you to be more holy. That's good. I hadn't thought about that. What else?
We worship a God of order, and if we're not careful, then we begin to follow our own devices. There was a time when Adam and Eve only had to make one decision every day: eat from the tree or don't eat from the tree. Eat from the tree or don't eat from the tree. Unfortunately, they ate from the tree, and now we have to make 1,000,000 decisions every day. And if we're not careful, we make the wrong decision. There's been order in creation that helps us maintain a sense of a direction that we should travel in, I believe.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Well, let me ask you this. You can, those decisions you were just talking about, David, you can either choose to live under God's rhythms or not. But if you don't live under God's rhythms, whose rhythm are you living under? The world. And who gets to choose? It's your rhythms at the end of the day, right? It's you and the world who determine how you live. That's like the definition of secularism. I am the captain of my own ship. But every time we live in a way that's different than we would prefer, because it's God's rhythm, we are trying to see this happening. Every time that we choose to live differently than we would want to, because God has required it of us, or he's inferred it from his scriptures, we are not living as our own boss. And we're using our time and our life and our energy and our means in submission, and which is to say in worship of him, which is very close to holiness, or at least certainly leads there. But every time we live life according to our chosen rhythms and the world's dictated rhythms, we're taking our time, and as I tell our kids in catechesis, we're taking what belongs to God and we're saying, mine. It's my time. You can't have it, God. So we're living within rhythms is a constant act of worship, which is a gift of self. And every time we violate it, it's taking what doesn't belong to us for what we believe is our own betterment in this world, which is the same action that Adam and Eve did when they took the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. They took what didn't belong to them. They said, I'm doing this because this is my number one way I'm going to provide for myself. It's no longer God. What do y'all think? Thoughts?
Well, if I'm the master of my own ship, I assure you, none of you want to be on my boat.
Thank you, David, for letting us know.
My grandfather used to say, a man alone is in poor company.
I like that.
Yeah, there is a rhythm that we should have to our life. There should be a morning prayer. Ravi Zacharias says, he says, I get up every morning and I pray and I read scripture. He said, I have a choice. I can do that or I can read the newspaper. He said, I prefer to look at the newspaper through the lens of scripture than to look at scripture through the lens of the newspaper.
Yeah.
I believe we need to order our lives the way God has given us order to do such.
Yeah, and one of the things, guys, that we didn't really get into, and it's unfortunate, and I'll briefly touch on it before we close, is that the church has received an order and a rhythm of life from the Old Covenant. one of the base. I'll just give you the basics. It's morning and evening prayer. It fulfills the morning and evening sacrifice of the old covenant. And Christians from the earliest of times have been keeping morning and evening prayer because of that. They believe it's prescriptive for them from the old covenant. They took the Sabbath from the old covenant. They said that's prescriptive. That carries over. Christ fulfilled it in the resurrection on Sunday. We will abide. The liturgical calendar is based off of the old covenant. We went into that, and so the feast days are no less non-negotiable, double negative, than the old covenant feasts. It's what people did. We didn't carry over the Sabbath year, unfortunately. But there's a prescribed way to live within God's world. I at least wanted to give you guys the idea and let this germinate, over the next few weeks. Any other closing thoughts, and then we'll call it a night.
Hey, Tony, I couldn't help but think that, one way to measure whether you're doing Sabbath right is the outcome. Right? It's not just how you do your Sabbath. It's whether at the end of the Sabbath you are rested and ready and prepared for whatever the coming week may offer. And that may be different strokes for different folks. But we can focus on the mechanisms of the Sabbath.
Yeah.
But if it's Sunday night, you're exhausted, dreading Monday, then you've done something.
That's a great point, Chris. I love that. I love that. Guys, this has been really fun. Thank you for joining us. I really appreciate it. It was good. John, it was good to see a new face.
Hey, thank you.
Scott, great to see you log on.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, and the rest of y'all, I will, good to see you all too.
Father Tony, can you recommend